It's another film study. It is Know Your Foe time as we look forward to Week 5 and the Bengals coming to town. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for this game because people weren't the Chiefs game. Obviously, people weren't happy. A lot of mixed feelings from the Washington football team. Now we get to move on to a divisional rivalry, and joining us to talk about the Bengals is Matt Minich, who writes and podcasts and whatever for Cincy Jungle. Matt, welcome to Film Study.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Matt, we've heard all kinds of good things about you being an X and O's guy. You go by guy at Coach Minich on Twitter. Is that correct? And that's spelled Minich?
Yep.
Okay. Wonderful. Give Matt a follow, and I'm sure he'll answer your Bengals questions without any of the other rivalry kind of trolling that will go with that normally or often does. We're thrilled to have you here, Matt. We want to talk a little bit about the Bengals offseason to start with. We usually do. Biggest acquisitions starting this offseason? And we'll save the draft for last, so I know who the biggest acquisition is.
Yeah, absolutely. We know what the biggest one is. But in terms of free agency, the first basically day of free agency came and went, and the Bengals didn't do anything. And there have been a lot of talk, a lot of hype. Zach Taylor came in late the previous year because he was coaching the Super Bowl with the Rams. So the coaching staff wasn't in place, and the word was that they were kind of went with the guys they had and didn't really want to go out there and spend a lot of money on free agents until the new coaching staff had really evaluated these guys. But here we were a day into free agency and nothing was happening. So there was a lot of negativity in Bengals Twitter. Oh, here we go, same old Bengals. But then they went on a spending spree. And really, they made some major improvements on the defense, adding DJ Reader to a major contract, Trey Waynes, who unfortunately is on IR, and Mackenzie Alexander. Those are kind of the big three right away. They spent a good amount of money, particularly on Reader and Waynes, trying to get that defense back to where it needs to be. A little bit later in free agency, they added Von Bell as a safety. They considered him kind of a luxury pick that they were surprised he was around, surprised they could afford him, but they were able to add him. They've also got Sean Williams as strong safety who returns, who they were comfortable with, but they added Bell and kind of shifted him into that role. And then the last big name they added to the defense is a familiar one to Ravens fans, and that's Josh Bynes.
Yep.
So Bynes, a bit of a journeyman, a little bit older, and as Ravens fans know, not an elite player, but definitely one that can come in and do some things for you and fill some gaps. And Bengals are very young at linebacker, as we'll talk about in a minute. And he has been a mentor to that group, and actually is a team captain. So he earned that respect and that gratitude from the defensive players.
Let me stop you for a second because Josh Bynes is a player I absolutely loved last year. Great, exactly what the Ravens needed in terms of a two-down run stopper. Did a great job in terms of being a platoon linebacker because it means obviously you can bring in a dime back. Fort could stay on the field for a lot of those dime back situations, a better cover guy. But Bynes was really very impressive right off the bat in terms of his ability to know what's going on behind him in terms of route combinations. And he had a pick. Actually, had two picks during the season. He had another PD early on, and that was exactly what the Ravens defense was missing. They rebuilt. In fact, they flushed the entire inside linebacker core after week 4 and brought Bynes and Ford in, and that was part of an astounding in-season rebuild for the 2019 Ravens. So I thought it was ridiculous not to re-sign him at the price he went to the Bengals.
Yeah, and the Bengals are happy to have him. And at that linebacker position, they've got a lot of youth. Outside of Bynes, they've got Jordan Evans, who's still on his rookie contract. He's a few years in, though. They've got Jermaine Pratt, who started the last half of last year. And then they've got some rookies, and those rookies are playing a lot. You talk about platoon and linebackers. They've got those guys playing on third downs. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, almost getting into the draft right there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think Bynes kind of fills a similar role and definitely fills a bit of a leadership void at that position, just with all of the youth they had.
Man, we love talking to you, by the way. Go in whatever order you like. I've laid out a little order here, but if you want to talk about draft picks because it's appropriate with other inside linebackers, do your thing.
So the other linebackers we'll talk about are Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis Gaither, the Bengals' 3rd and 4th round picks. So Logan Wilson was a guy that the Bengals had a 2nd round grade on. They were kind of a run of linebackers late in the 2nd round, and they were happy to get him at the top of the 3rd. He's looked pretty good, and he's developing nicely, not making the same mistakes twice, coming along in these first few weeks. The Bengals are really platooning those guys, as he termed it. They've got Bynes and Jermaine Pratt on 1st and 2nd down, and then they've been putting Wilson and Akeem Davis Gaither in on 3rd down. Wilson missed last week with a concussion, so not clear what his status is. I believe they're going to try and work him into position groups. It was what Zach Taylor said on Wednesday, and we'll see if he is out there for that game. But rookie out of Wyoming, I think he had like 10 career picks in college. So wow. Real good pass defender, especially in zone. Has a real good feel for those things in zone. And Akeem Davis Gaither, I'm sure a lot of the people that listen to your podcast are draft guys, and of course he was a very popular draft crush this year out of Appalachian State. Really played kind of a hybrid edge, strong safety, almost nickel corner type of position in college, but the Bengals are turning him into more of a true off the ball linebacker. So looking forward to getting those guys in there on 3rd downs. We're definitely seeing those guys start to progress. The other big free agent acquisition that they made was Xavier Su'a-Filo. Comes in at guard. They were hoping, I think fans were hoping to see a lot more changes on the offensive line. Unfortunately, that was the only real one they made. And he played in the first game, was injured, and now he's on IR. So that has created a bit of an issue at the right guard position. And, that's something we'll talk about when we get more into the O-line. But in terms of like guys that they were hoping would develop and step up, I think that was kind of the idea on the offensive line. Jonah Williams was their rookie 1st round pick in 2019. I believe the 11th overall selection out of Alabama. He has looked very good, but he's still young. So he looks promising. Every once in a while, he does some freakish things, picking up blitzes off the edge, just what he can do athletically. So he looked good, but had missed that whole year. So even though he's in year 2, he's coming up on game 5 here. And at left guard, Michael Jordan was a rookie late round pick for them last year, who ended up taking over the starting role, and they are very high on. He has been a little bit rough this year, though. We haven't seen him take the step forward that we would like to see. So that creates really an issue at both guard positions, that those guys are underachieving a little bit.
Let's take a step back for a second. When I talk about development guys, one of the things I want to know about is how the Bengals are planning ahead to sign their franchise cornerstones long term. So Bengals have a number of 4th-year players. You mentioned Jordan Evans already, but Carl Lawson is a huge 4th-year player who I assume he's not extended yet, correct?
No, he's not. William Jackson is another huge one that they're going to have to figure out, and obviously those are at premier positions. Lawson hasn't been an every down guy, but his skill set as a pass rusher is going to make him a very, very valuable commodity if he does hit the market. So both of those guys, could be difficult for them to be able to bring back. Financially, I think they can afford it, but it's how much are they going to be willing to pay for those guys?
Right. And Joe Mixon is in year 4. Is Mixon got his contract yet?
Yes, they extended him during camp.
Okay, so that's great. And then, of course, coming up after this offseason will be the first chance to extend Jesse Bates. I assume they're going to look at that pretty seriously pretty soon.
Yeah, I would definitely think so. He had a rough game against the Browns, missed a bunch of tackles, but that's not why you draft Jesse Bates. You draft him to make plays on the football, and he's definitely been doing that. He's had 3 picks each of his first 2 seasons, and he has been, I believe, the top graded, safety by PFF over the last 2 weeks. So bounced back nicely from that.
All right.
And then the big name too is AJ Green. So AJ Green is they franchise tagged him for this year. So for what they're currently getting out of him, the figure they're paying him is definitely not worth it, and we're going to kind of see where they go with that at the end of the year. As we look to the draft and not get into the guy that we're going to talk a lot about yet, but T. Higgins is a guy who has really stepped up as a rookie, and right now, although he's not getting as many reps as AJ, he really looks like that number 2 receiver in the way he's contributing, and the way he's getting open and the rapport that he's starting to build with Joe Burrow. He's really moving into that role. AJ is having some trouble, and a lot of the reports out of Cincinnati are, well, he hasn't lost his step. He's just a little rusty. He's a rep guy. He needs to get his reps. So they've been very positive about that. But as the weeks go along, it's getting a little bit harder to believe that he doesn't seem like the same guy right now. And I think he can still be a very good player in this league, but I think the role that they have cast him in and what he has been for so long, I'm not sure that that's what his future is.
Well, where they are with AJ Green, he's got a 44% cash rate this year, and I would question, I guess, in part, what his value is if they were to trade him. But aren't the Bengals a team that would consider at this point trading some of their players who are either older, and obviously they have to be some sort of producer still, or maybe even were at the end of the first year contract where they didn't think they could afford to re-sign them if there was a taker out there?
That's something that frustrates fans because they don't tend to be sellers. They haven't been able to get those kinds of deals done. And I mean, you look at Andy Dalton last year, and they didn't even give him the option to seek a trade, even though they were benching him around midseason. They benched him basically. They told him the day of the trade deadline. So they ended up getting nothing off of him and cutting him after holding him up for a while, trying to see if they could move him in the offseason. So it hasn't really been their thing to do that. But, yeah, I mean, if you're not going to bring back Carl Lawson, if you're talking to his agent and that number is not going to be where you want it to be, there's definitely a playoff team that would love to have that rotational piece come in there for a playoff run. William Jackson, if somebody has an injured corner or something, if you're not going to sign him, they could definitely use a guy like that. But I'm not sure if that's sort of things in the card, especially for AJ, because this club shows a lot of loyalty to AJ Green, and for all the negatives, of being a small town club and a family owned club that you kind of get a little bit of a negative vibe from that sometimes. They are loyal, and they take care of their own people. The Bengals get a bad rap about being cheap, but they are not cheap with re-signing their own players. They've been a little bit cheap with going out and getting other players, but they do tend to show loyalty and take care of their own. And would they trade AJ if he wasn't comfortable with the situation? Like, I don't know. I think they would give AJ the right to examine it and make that determination for himself.
Okay, so the Bengals are sitting right now at something like 10th in the league, might be 11th in terms of available cap space, which is not the important number for them, obviously, that they have $10 million of cap. Other than they'd probably like to push those cap dollars forward into 2021, like all NFL teams right now, given the reduced COVID cap next year. Those dollars would be worth more. Well, the Bengals also are 8th next year, as I see it on OTC right now, with $27 million. The Ravens, obviously a competitor in the division, have $44 million currently relative to that base. Some big contracts to sign. It sounds like the Bengals have a couple of big ones to sign too. And looking through the fourth-year players, it's Lawson, it's Jackson. Don't know who else. I guess maybe it's Bates a year early.
Yeah, and I would say Brandon Wilson's a big one. who returned a kickoff for a touchdown against the Ravens last year. You'll remember him from that.
Right, I remember.
But yeah, he led the league last year in kickoff return yardage. So probably not a big money guy as a reserve safety and a kickoff returner, but he would be a priority guy for them.
All right, Alex Redmond. Do they have any interest in really retaining him, or do they think they just move on just as easily with a draft pick?
I mean, Redmond is a guy who's stepped in last week to the right guard spot, which has been a little bit of musical chairs this year, and they played pretty well, and he kind of solidified it. So I think we'll see how it goes with him the rest of the year. Although I would like to think that they're going to look to, as they remade the defense last year, remake hopefully both lines, but really remake the offensive line next offseason. I would hope that'd be where they prioritize putting their money.
Okay, and I know this name hasn't come up, so I don't think he's on the Bengals' radar to resign necessarily. But John Ross, obviously a first-round pick 4 years ago, is he still a guy they may be retaining?
I doubt it. John Ross has been a healthy scratch the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Against the Browns, he had 2 targets, one of which a little bit up in the air, and I didn't feel like he put great effort into coming down with. And the other was he was on a drag route, and it didn't look like he was expecting the ball to even come. So I'm not sure that he's really even on the same page. And the coaches are saying the positive lines. Oh, we like how he responded in practice. A lot of things go into that stuff. They're saying all those things right now, but it's definitely not looking good for Ross in his future. And yeah, if somebody wants to take a risk on that speed, that would definitely be a guy that I would think they'd be willing to move.
Traditional number for a guy like that, and I don't think this would look very good for the organization, would be something like a 7th-round pick at this point. It wouldn't be much higher than that. I think we'd agree on somebody like John Ross. Maybe a conditional 6th, but I don't think it's the kind of guy you get a 4th for or a 5th for at this point with only a year left on his contract.
Yeah, with only a year, and we haven't seen any kind of solid production out of him. I mean, you look at the beginning of last year; he's healthy for a few games, and they managed. He made some big plays for them. He kept him in some of those games in September when they weren't a very good team, but they completed a couple of bombs to him, and it kept him available in games. So I think he's a guy that like the Patriots have been pretty good at this in the past. I think he's a guy that needs to go to a talented team that doesn't really need him, where he's kind of a luxury piece, and they need to protect him and save him for the playoffs and for games that they need. So the kind of guy that will disappear, that'll frustrate you in your fantasy team because they're playing a divisional game that they need to win, and he has a couple big plays, and then he disappears for 3 weeks. I look at the Patriots. I thought the Patriots did a great job with that with like Danny Amendola, who's a guy who struggled to stay healthy when he was with other teams, but they kept him healthy, and they had him in the playoffs, and he did some good things for them.
All right. Well, you talked a little bit about T. Higgins. Let's talk about the guy we haven't talked about, the elephant in the room.
All right, so Joe Burrow, everything's as advertised right now. Very efficiently running the offense, making some mistakes, but not boneheaded crazy mistakes for the most part. And when he does those, you don't tend to see them again. But he has kept this team in these close games in the early part of the season. You look at the Browns. I mean, they came back against the Browns, who were running the ball all over the place on them. Largely with Burrow throwing the ball all over the place. It reminds me a little bit of people that watched the Thursday night game, the first Thursday night game of the year, where you're watching Deshaun Watson and you're like, why this guy is so good? Why is nobody helping him out? You get a little bit of that vibe. And not so much last week when they put things together and came up with a win, but those first couple of weeks there were some drop balls from receivers. There was the O-line giving up a number of sacks and pressures, which hurt him. But I mean, he's got the juice. He's definitely got it. The only issue right now that they've had is really connecting on deep balls, and look, arm strength was a question mark with him. I don't think that's the issue. It's just some of the communication is off on these things where it's like he's throwing a back shoulder and AJ's not looking for that, or he's leading T Higgins and T Higgins is stopping short on it. So I think they're just not quite on the same page with some of those things yet.
Now, what I've seen is he's been unbelievably good on the intermediate passes, the 10 to 20 yard throws.
Yes, I believe I don't know if it's Pro Football Weekly, but somebody ranked him. He's one of the top ranked guys in the league on those intermediate throws, and he's done an excellent job on those. And there was the CJ Uzomah touchdown on Thursday Night Football against the Browns was their only pass completed of over 20 yards in the season. But then you look at it and there's like a bunch of 19-yard passes.
Right.
It's right in that middle range. He's been good, but they definitely need to figure out how to stretch the field a little bit.
All right. Well, we certainly never like to see another great quarterback come into the division. And I'm pretty sure Burrow is that. And after 1 week, I wasn't sure about Mayfield anymore. Now my concern level has been raised again. But anyway, we are where we are. That's great. Let's talk now a little bit about the rest of the offense in terms of what they bring. Take us through the wide receiver core. Why don't you take us through the offensive line first? That's where I like to start anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think offensive line is always the best place to start, and I'm one of those people that when I'm watching film, I skip to the tight shot and I go back to the wide because unless you know how they're blocking it, it doesn't really matter. But Trey Hopkins is the center. He was their best offensive lineman last year by far. He struggled a little bit in some of these early games, but he's kind of starting to balance out a little bit. He had roughly a 72. Pass blocking grade from Pro Football Focus this weekend, so kind of getting him back to where he needs to be. I touched on the left side of the line a little bit already with Michael Jordan is the left guard. He is a second-year player. Positive trajectory in his rookie year, and this year is not fizzled out and has not taken the steps he needs to. Jonah Williams, 11th overall pick in 2019 at left tackle, and he looks like he's going to be the franchise left tackle that they are looking for. Would like to see him develop, throughout the course of the year, but as long as that stuff comes along like it should, he should be a nice little centerpiece for them. The right side is the issue. They've got Bobby Hart at right tackle. He is, if you pay any attention to Bengals Twitter, Bengals fan Twitter, he is the number one
Whipping
person
boy.
they're going to blame for anything.
Yep.
And I will post clips sometimes of Jonah Williams making a great block, and people will comment, "Oh man, Bobby Hart's terrible on this," and he's not. It's actually a pretty good rep from Bobby Hart, but we just love to blame Bobby Hart for things. Look, he's not great, and he's not good. He's not what you want at that position. That's the number one thing that they should be doing this offseason is looking to address the right tackle position. However, first week wasn't good. The last few weeks, he's playing about as good as he can. And he is peak Bobby Hart right now, which, like I said, not what you want, but if he can keep playing at the level he is, he's not going to be the reason they're losing football games. So definitely a guy you're looking to replace, but he has been playing at a pretty high for him on his skill level so far over the last few weeks. At right guard, it was supposed to be Xavier Su'a-Filo, who started I think 5 or 6 games for the Cowboys last year. And he got hurt. He got hurt first game of the year. He's on IR. No telling when he's coming back. Billy Price, former first-round draft pick, came in for him. Did not look good. The next 2 games actually, they started Fred Johnson. He got benched after game 3. And then in game 4, they went with Alex Redmond, who he'd been sticking around for a while. They actually cut him. He didn't do much during camp because he had a wrestling injury somehow in the offseason.
Like a fooling around wrestling injury? Did he actually do some pro wrestling of some sort?
You know what? It was like he's another guy that the Bengals fans don't love, and I saw it and I was just like, I don't even care. I can't deal with it with this guy. So I never followed up on the details on that. But he's a guy who's been kind of notorious for getting holding penalties. And he got one last weekend, actually, on a toss play, and it was a very legitimate hold. It was a toss play going the other direction, and he reached out and grabbed the linebacker. But, yeah, so he did seem to solidify things a little bit. This was definitely a step back competition-wise from, the Browns, the Chargers, and the Eagles. Those are some solid defensive lines, and we expect to see a solid defensive front this week in the Ravens. So, what they faced last week with Jacksonville was not that. So, we'll see what he can do against upgraded competition. But overall, I think the right side was the concern coming into the year. I think really everybody in the middle struggled in the early games. But they did start to kind of put some things together in that last game. So hoping to kind of build on that momentum. I know last year, the first 8 games of the year, they couldn't run the ball to save their lives. Then they retooled some things, and I think Mixon had like 817 yards, I believe is the number, over the last 8 games. So hoping that this is a faster version of that. That they get going a little bit now and can get the run game going and also keep the heat off of QB1 back there.
Wait, let me ask you this, and the Billy Price pick is one I keep coming back to because I hate drafting centers in the first round for starters. But, to draft a guy 21st, how do you see the Bengals self-examining what's happened? This is really a question more appropriate to Browns fans because that organization has blown a lot more number 1 picks than the Bengals have. But how do you see them self-evaluating and trying to learn from what bad number 1 picks they've made?
Yeah, and they wanted, the rumor was that they wanted Frank Ragnow, and the Lions traded up in front of them and got him. They went into that year with a bad situation on the offensive line. They traded back in the draft. They flopped picks with the Buffalo Bills and picked up Cordy Glenn for switching picks and moving, I want to say it was like 9 picks back, which could have been a brilliant move. If they get Frank Ragnow or they're getting, a starting offensive lineman out of that, and then Cordy Glenn, if Cordy Glenn was still around, and they're getting 2 for the price of 1, that might have been worth it, but not the way it went. Really, really neither one of those picks has worked out for them. Price, they drafted him to play center. He didn't work out at center. He has been getting some play at guard. He started a handful of games at left guard last year. Started one game at right guard. We actually pretty good against the Dolphins. And then, for whatever reason this year wasn't happening for him. But, historically they've drafted best available. There was a year they kept drafting corners in the first round, even though they didn't need them. And for the most part, it worked out for them. They got William Jackson out of that. They got Darqueze Dennard, who they moved to slot, but he ended up being a very good slot. And then Dre Kirkpatrick, who never really lived up to being a first-round pick, but was a solid starter at corner for a long time. And this was, like a bit of an impulse thing, where like they just decided they had to get that center, and very frustrating. I liked Ragnow. If he was there, I would have been fine with it. I honestly was a little higher on Price than I was on James Daniels, so shame on me for that. But I feel like with Price and Daniels there, you could have traded back, or you could have had it somewhere like the early 40s for your second round pick. So, you had to feel like one of those guys was going to be around there, or you could just move up a couple slots in the second round and get that guy. So very disappointing. Hey, they could have had Lamar Jackson there.
Yeah, well, so could have a lot of teams. Almost everybody had a shot at him.
Yeah, that's the. I'm sure every fan base is like this, but John Ross, even if John Ross is playing great, he would never outlive not being Patrick Mahomes, and Billy Price could all of a sudden start at right guard next week and have a Pro Bowl year, and nobody's ever going to forget that Lamar Jackson was there.
All right, wide receiver core. Take us through individually what they bring to the game, how you see them used differently.
So really, wide receiver one right now is Tyler Boyd, and Boyd is an excellent slot receiver. Hasn't really had the opportunity just with the way this team has been over the last few years to showcase it. But I believe that he's one of the better receivers in the league. Fringe top 15, top 10 kind of range potentially in the right situation. And as a big slot guy, he shares some similarities in the types of things he does well with Justin Jefferson. So natural fit for Burrow to hook up with Boyd. And I expect very big things out of Boyd. And as this relationship with Burrow continues to develop, I think we're going to see him as a guy that is talked about as one of those top receivers in the league, and is putting up some serious numbers, as we get into year 2 and beyond.
This just jumps off the page at me, but it looks like Boyd is 13 of 14 on targets between 10 and 20 yards. He's a big part of what Burrow's done there. And Burrow's been outstanding. It's not just been him, but his overall catch rate is also excellent. I mean, his shorter passes, he's caught most of them, as you would expect, and he's only 0 for 1 on balls over 20, which is a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of the Bengals right now. It's those,
but only one target. It's a little that's low for Tyler Boyd, right? I mean, I still have visions of him running down the seam and taking the Ravens out of the playoffs.
Sure. Yeah. I wasn't going to bring that up, but
that's all right.
No. I mean, I definitely would like to see them get the deep ball going more in general. And actually, I just put together a film piece earlier today, and I was looking at some situations where they're in 3rd and long, and the other team's in cover 2, and I was, why aren't we working the middle of the field? A lot of the deep balls that they have attempted have been fades. There have been a couple of slot fades, but I don't even think that was Boyd. I'm trying to remember what target Boyd had that was over 20 yards, but I feel like the slot fades have been some of the other guys. So. For some reason, they don't really seem to be targeting that area of the field much. But I mean, he's great on those dig routes, coming across the middle, and really fills a role that's big with Burrow in an area that Burrow likes to target quite a bit. The Bengals said over in the pre-draft process, they said that they were going to take some of what Burrow liked at LSU and make sure they highlighted it and incorporated it into their offense. And we've definitely seen some of that, stylistically with some of the pass plays that they're running in there. So that's going to be a great connection. I think this is the perfect scenario. This is the perfect quarterback to bring out Tyler Boyd, and really he is the wide receiver one as far as that's concerned right now. T. Higgins, they drafted with the 33rd overall pick this year. We talked about a little bit already, but he is developing very quickly, which is really promising for a receiver. The big issue with him, they saw him as a first round pick. He didn't have good testing, and that's probably why he was around there. So he's not necessarily a guy who's gonna fly by you, but once they start connecting on some of these deep passes, he's one of those guys that, like an AJ Green, can play some of those back shoulder fades and out jump guys and make some plays on some of those balls. So looking forward to seeing that. AJ Green, they are targeting him like crazy, and they want to get him the ball, and you see Joe going to him, trying to get him going, but right now it's just not happening. They say he's the same athletically. They say that he's just gonna shake some of the rust off. To me, I think it's a Larry Fitzgerald situation where he's just a little bit older, and maybe he needs to be more of a big slot than that outside receiver to be successful and productive in the NFL for a few more years. And got Tyler Boyd, so I'm not sure how that's really going to work out.
Looking at the two players here, Boyd, the passer rating throwing to him is 117. AJ Green, 54.
Yeah, and I mean they're targeting him like crazy, and just not making those connections. And there's a lot of times when you see it and you're like, all right, well, Burrow, this wasn't a great throw, but Burrow put it somewhere we had a chance to make a play on it, and that's an AJ Green play. that's what you're used to seeing him do, is go up there and make those plays. I mean, there was one year where he had 2 consecutive weeks he caught Hail Mary passes. Like,
Right. Well, one of them was probably against the Ravens. I think on that tip ball.
Yeah, so it's like, what do he just doesn't seem like he's AJ anymore. I think he can still be good, but I just don't think he's AJ anymore. Auden Tate was a 7th round pick a couple years ago, big dude, and he's another guy that excellent hands, can come up with some jump balls. Not a speed guy. And then the one guy that does have a little bit of shake to him is Mike Thomas, who they picked up as a free agent this year. He seems to have a real nice rapport with Boyd as well. Was not as involved last week as he had been in previous weeks, though.
Okay, so Auden Tate last year had one very big game against the Ravens. I think it was in Baltimore. He might have had about 7 catches. But I'm seeing he's only been targeted 5 times the whole year, so he must not be getting a lot of snaps.
Yeah, and Tate was a healthy scratch the week before Ross was. So it's tough right now because they're trying to do all this with AJ and they're not able to connect on it. You got AJ, you got Tyler Boyd, you got T. Higgins, you got Mike Thomas, you got Auden Tate, you got John Ross, and then honestly they're kind of blowing an active roster spot right now on Alex Erickson, who gets like 3 plays on offense, but he's their punt returner.
Gotcha. Is he a special teams ace going the other way in terms of covering kicks as well?
He's doing it a little bit this year, but I mean, not really. They've got Stanley Morgan Jr. on their practice squad, who I'd rather see covering kicks, to be honest with you.
Right. Every once in a while, I don't know who fits this mold for Cincinnati, but the Ravens, they're great special teams players, are usually great kick coverage guys, but they hang around as 2-year special teams players, 2-year contracts at a time with the Ravens, because they're guys who can also fill some smaller defensive role usually, or potentially an offensive role as a occasional use receiver. But most commonly, it's a defensive role, like your dime back. And Anthony Levine is also a great special teams player, or a backup inside linebacker is also a great special teams player. It's pretty common for linebackers to do that. But do the Ravens really have the Bengals really have anybody who meets that mold?
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Wilson, we mentioned before, returns kicks for them, and very good in coverage. He plays safety, so he naturally kind of has the skill set to cover kicks. He covers punts as well, and he's really their 4th safety right now, but he was their 3rd safety before Sean Williams came back. So he definitely fits into that mold. I guess it's kind of a transitionary period right now, which makes it a little bit difficult, where Erickson had a larger role on the offense, but now they've attacked that position and added some guys, and he's down the pecking order offensively. But then they didn't really find anybody to fill that role returning punts. Ethan Carter is a 3rd string tight end fullback who does a lot of stuff on special teams, and Sean Williams was the started every game last year at safety. But he's a very good special teams player for them as well. And now he's the 3rd safety and kind of more the dime safety. And then Jordan Evans is the one guy outside of Bynes. He's really the one guy that was here 2 years ago at linebacker. He's actually stepping up at linebacker a little bit. He's been buried behind some of these young guys, but he played pretty well with Logan Wilson out last week. But he does some good things on special teams as well. They lost a big one last year in Clayton Fedulum, who went to Miami. He was their personal protector, but also played a lot of other roles on special teams, and was their 3rd safety. And he's moved on to Miami now. Alrighty.
Let's move on to the running backs here, and the use of a fullback. I always like to talk about. So we know who the guys are in terms of Mixon and Giovanni Bernard, of course. Talk about usage and scheme for those guys.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when you talk about usage of a fullback. When we're talking about usage on special teams, I think the Ravens' use of the fullback and use of a 3 technique at fullback is genius. I think everybody should do it. The Bengals a couple of years ago were playing Sam Hubbard at fullback. Now it's moved on to Ethan Carter, that 3rd tight end, who is playing that role. When they get into goal line situations, they also they had an injury to CJ Uzama, so they're a little light at that position. They'll bring in an extra offensive lineman in those goal line situations to play tight end as well. First couple of weeks, it was 6th-round pick rookie Hakeem Adeniji from Kansas. But since Fred Johnson's out of the lineup now, it has been Fred Johnson last week. In terms of the running backs, it's the Joe Mixon show. They just gave him a lot of money. They want to run the ball a lot with Joe Mixon, and occasionally use him in the pass game. I think they're getting him a little bit more involved in the pass game, but not as much as fans would like. But that's what they want to be. They want to run the ball with Mixon, and they want to play action pass. That's what they were able to do last week. What happened in the first few games, and what will happen in this game if they give up a couple of early scores to the Ravens, is they just get out of that position to be able to run the football, and then it becomes a little bit more Giovanni Bernard. Mixon is okay in pass protection, and he's good as a receiver. Giovanni Bernard is excellent as a pass protector. Has very good hands. Real quick guy that you can use in a lot of different ways. So he's really like the true stereotypical, prototypical third down back. It is Bernard. Sometimes I'm watching clips of the O-line, and the O-line's like there's a stunt in front of the O-line, and the O-line completely screws it up, and you see Gio, and he just like sorts it out, and then he picks up the linebacker that comes along. All this other stuff's going on in front of him, but he makes his block, he gets his guy, even though he is tiny. He is the smallest guy on the team, but he can make those blocks.
Well, the Ravens fan have unfond memories of Bernard being moved up by Dalton into a sniffer role on that 4th and 12 play, and it was pre-snap. Dalton moved him up, to basically be right behind the guard so he could pick up an A-gap blitz if it occurred. It actually didn't. But my fear on that play was, and I think what the Ravens' fear was also, was that Bernard was going to be the really tough out to stop short of the sticks if they checked down to him. And they moved Eric Weddle up on the play to invert their coverage and I think effectively try and take Bernard out of that. And it obviously it didn't work out, and they ended up very exposed on the back end. And they tried to drag that seam with C.J. Mosley, and it's way too much of a disadvantage to try and do that when you have the guy up in the A-gap blitzing.
Yeah, and he's a guy who's he's got the versatility. He is a little dude, but it's a tough matchup for guys because he's so quick out of his cuts, and you're probably better off with a safety there, but. But he creates some interesting mismatches for you, and like I say, he's great in terms of picking up the pass rush.
Okay, so that takes us through, I think, the running backs a little bit. We do kind of need to pick it up a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm really enjoying this conversation, enjoying all you have to say about this. But they run mostly out of 11 currently. They don't put a fullback on the field very often, correct?
Yes, they were doing a little bit of 12 personnel early, but CJ Uzama got injured, and now it's mostly 11. A little bit of zero. They run a fair amount of empty, and sometimes they will actually do it with 5 receivers.
Okay, so it's not just Mixon splitting wide on those plays. That's interesting.
It's a little bit of both. They'll do that with Mixon and with Drew Sample, the tight end, but not exclusively, no.
Okay. And so in terms of how other teams have responded to that, when the Bengals have their most typical, probably 11 personnel on the field, are almost all teams responding with a standard nickel?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Okay, so that's been a Ravens strength over the years that they've finally gotten back to in the last couple of weeks, is being able to stop the run pretty effectively out of the standard nickel against 11 personnel. So obviously that's something we'll look forward to this weekend. Is there anything else that's like common in terms of a play or formation that comes up fairly often? Maybe bunches or anything like that they do fairly often?
Yeah, they do a good amount of bunch. This week they started a motion pre-snap quite a bit more, and went to a lot more jet sweeps, which I think really helped to open up the running game and hold some of those backside pursuit defenders a little bit. They run a lot of air raid concepts in the pass game. In terms of running, they're a zone team. They'll do the zone insert where they put the They don't have a fullback, so the H-back will be blocking on the backside inside linebacker and creating a cutback opportunity. And then they run quite a bit of toss, where with the toss play, when they run it to the strong side, they're going to pull the guard and center out in front, and really trying to give Mixon an opportunity in space to be able to make a cutback and make a play on that.
Okay. All right, but it's often a two-man pull on those toss plays.
Yes, to the strong side, yes. To the weak side, it was last year, but this year they're kind of free releasing the guard up to the linebacker. They're not really pulling him, but they'll pull the weak side tackle, and they'll do a crack block on it.
Rough percentage of zone to power runs? Relationship.
Ooh, I don't have that in front of me right now. I
no, that's
tweeted it
okay.
out the
Just
other day, though.
off the top of your head is just kind of what you think. Is it even, or is it more zone, more power? What do they do?
I think they're sitting at about 50% inside zone right now, and a little bit outside zone. Not a ton of power counter stuff. Really tosses the other big thing for them.
Okay. All right. All right, very good. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. The first thing I always like to get into are what are their base defensive looks before you get into the individual players. So if the other team lines up in 12 or 21, what's the scheme that the Bengals usually counter with?
Well, like everybody else in the league, there is no base because nickel is base.
Yep.
So they do run quite a bit of 4-down nickel. But in the situation you're talking about, it against a team like the Ravens, they're probably going to be in their 3-4 look most often. It's kind of a funky 3-4 where it's really a 5-2, because Sam Hubbard, Carl Lawson, Carlos Dunlap, those guys are your outside linebackers in that situation. They bring in an extra defensive tackle when they take off when they take the nickel corner off the field. This year, it's been a lot of bear fronts out of that with a zero technique and 2 3s. So, one guy over the center and then guys in
Sure.
both B gaps. They'll do a little bit of what I call eagle as well, where it's essentially the same thing, but the nose tackle is shaded. Last year, there was a decent amount of under, but I haven't seen a ton of under front out of them from that look this year.
Okay. All right. Always interesting to hear that. And the other thing you mentioned was that they seem to be from the platooning and bringing in Akeem Davis-Gaither and Logan Wilson on 3rd down. That sounds like kind of a committed nickel team. But then you also mentioned a dime back a little bit earlier. I just kind of want to get a sense of how often do the Bengals go to the dime?
Not a ton. I'm wondering if that's going to change. And I don't know if this will be the week for it to change, but just because Sean Williams was out the first couple of weeks, but he was a pretty good, reliable player for them last year as the starter at safety. I think Von Bell is really better underneath. So I would like to, I could definitely see them when they're in long yardage situations, especially if they want to go to a cover 4 or cover 2 or something like that, bringing in Sean Williams to play the deep field and leaving Bell in to match up on a tight end or a slot or something along those lines. Last year, they ran it a little less than 20% of the time. I believe it was their 3rd most common defensive front, most common being nickel, and the second most being that 3-4 personnel.
Okay, so that's fairly common now in the NFL today, of course. The dime, I got this interesting story. I always want to talk to old Bengals fans about this to see what they remember. But obviously, Lewis was there for a very long time as the head coach, and he's our defensive coordinator in 2000, and ran an unbelievable amount of very light packages. And it's not remembered that way even by Ravens fans, but they ran 34.5% dime and quarter packages. They ran 55 snaps during the regular season with 7 DBs on the field. And it wasn't just they're way ahead or something. That was a standard 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6 kind of package they would run. When Marvin went to the Bengals, and obviously spent a year in DC too, but when he went to the Bengals, I assumed the Bengals would go to lots of that. And particularly since the Bengals pass rush was so effective, it might make a really good fit for them to have 7 good pass defenders or 6 good pass defenders on a high percentage of snaps behind that. And how, for those years that Marvin was there, how much did he meddle in the defensive coordinator's playbook to try and go to more DB heavy packages, or did he at all?
I think he was pretty hands off, to be honest with you. They had Leslie Frazier there the first year, and it was actually a pretty big surprise that Marvin fired him after the season. But especially in the last half of his tenure, with Zimmer. Zimmer was a guy he put a lot on and gave a lot to. So I don't think he was. I think he was a little bit more of a manager than really being actively involved in the defense from what I've taken from things.
That would be very hard to do. If I were him, I don't know how I could lay off. Given all the success he had as a defense coordinator in Pittsburgh and Baltimore, and wow,
I couldn't believe that Takeo Spikes was a free agent the year that they brought Marvin in, and he went to Buffalo. Like, how do you not say this guy coached Ray Lewis? I'll give him a year. You know what I mean? Just see what happens. But yeah,
try and figure it out. Yeah, he's a good player for a long time. Okay, well let's go back into the other things. Let's talk first of all about pass rush scheme and personnel, and tell us how they refit on third down.
So on third down, they're going to take Sam Hubbard, who's a defensive end for them, and they're going to move him around. Lots of times he gets kicked in and he plays defensive tackle, and then they'll have Carlos Dunlap and Lawson on the ends. But occasionally they'll put him at Mike linebacker, and what they would do a lot of last year was they put him right behind Geno Atkins, and the two would play a little game on that A-gap together. So Hubbard's a guy that he's not an extraordinary player. He's not like, wow, look at that guy. But he's a guy that he does so many things well that he's a really useful, versatile piece for them. And yeah, they'll kick him in. They'll generally on third down they're going to be in the nickel or a dime, and it's going to be a 4-man front for them. Although earlier in the year they were running a little bit light on in their dime package and actually leaving an extra linebacker in the field and only having 3. So that's the other thing they can do is when they have that 3-man look, they'll leave those young linebackers on the field, and both of those guys can blitz. We've seen it on this college tape, particularly out of Akeem Davis Gaither, but they'll send one off the edge, they'll send one up the middle, they'll do 4 down front, and they'll put both those guys in the A gap. They may drop off, they may not. So they'll do a few different things like that, trying to at least influence that offensive line on third down. Really, they're missing something without Geno Atkins, though. I mean, not clear, not looking good for this weekend, from what I'm hearing. So not clear when he's going to be back, but without Atkins, they're really missing something in terms of the inside pass rush.
Right. I mean, obviously, he's tormented the Ravens over the years. Obviously, we're happy to miss him if he should care to take a week off, but we understand. So what you mentioned earlier is more like a 32 dime look they had, where they had 3 on the line of scrimmage and 2 inside linebackers behind them.
Yeah. So last year it was more of a 4 down big dime where they were bringing in an extra safety, and this year. They have been doing a little bit of 3 down dime and leaving an extra backer. I think because they have those young linebackers and they know they can blitz some of those guys, and they're just trying to get the best advantage they can that way in terms of having more speed on the field.
Okay. Hey, Ravens played that for 1 year, but there have been very few teams which have really gone with 32 dime in the time since. Dallas played it for a little while, but there really haven't been a lot of teams that have done it. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's it's the impact of having those young linebackers who definitely bring some versatility to them.
Let's talk individually about the defensive linemen and go through that. I think we talked a little bit about the linebackers already. We'll probably skip that, but take us through the defensive line first.
Yeah, so we talked about Hubbard, and he's a versatile piece. Really, it's Hubbard and Dunlap are basically the starting defensive ends. and Lawson is a little bit more of a rotational piece. He can play the run, and I think he's shown some things against the run. But going back to the Marvin Lewis days, they believed that less was more with him. They could get more out of him from limiting his snaps a little bit. He's an excellent pass rusher, though. Really, he's got that inside hump move where he strong arms with the inside arm and comes inside. Really excellent when he puts that together. Really all three of those guys become outside linebackers in that 3-4 package, and you do see them dropping off. You do see them in coverage, standing up, defending on the edge. I think Hubbard does a little bit more of that stuff, and I think they kind of scheme it up to send the other guys more often because Hubbard has some versatility. But yeah, they all do that. And then without Geno inside, it's a good thing they brought in DJ Reader. He's been very good against the run, but this team has just been so banged up. They brought in Mike Daniels. Mike Daniels is now on IR. They're playing guys like Amani Bledsoe, and who's a younger guy, really should be more of a depth developmental type of piece. And these guys are getting involved, and they're really not ready. So they're very thin on the internal defensive front there.
So when you see that happen, and the Bengals, it doesn't appear, even that with Burrow's apparent, greatness, that they're going to contend this year. Do you have a problem with the trial by fire for somebody like Bledsoe? We had it last year with Ferguson while you were trying to respond, and I actually was pretty positive on it.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's kind of what they're doing with the linebackers. Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaither are making mistakes, but they got to make them. You got to see reps. Young guys need reps. So, guys that you believe in, put them out there. And let it happen. Let them get those reps, and they gotta see it. They gotta get live reps, and that's really the only way to get better is to make these mistakes. So might as well make them now instead of next year, and hopefully they're competing for the playoffs.
All right, there you go. Okay, we talked a little bit about the linebackers and the younger guys in particular. Is there anybody else we didn't mention with the linebacker group? You talked about Josh Bynes a little bit. Anybody else needs to be mentioned?
I think I kind of brushed over Jermaine Pratt. He was their third-round pick out of North Carolina State in 2019. And he took over the starting role about halfway through last year. So really, he and Bynes are the two on the early downs. He did some good things against the pass too, though. So I'm a little surprised that they don't leave him in on some of those plays. But yeah, he's been a solid player for them, and seems to be kind of developing nicely after his rookie year.
Okay, all right. He'd be the kind of guy I'd really want to see what we had too, if we had him. How about the secondary?
Yeah, so you've got William Jackson, who I think is playing very well this year. Of course, Ravens fans probably only seen the Bengals on Thursday Night Football this year, so you see him out there competing with OBJ, and I think he did pretty well with that. But OBJ is going to get you sometimes, so he definitely had some low moments in that game. But I think Jackson's a real good corner for them. Excellent tackler. Like out of nowhere this year, all of a sudden he's like a really good tackler too. It's kind of an interesting aspect of the way they play defense. Is I feel like their corners get in the box a lot. I mean, more so their slots, but you see some of the corners even right on the edge of the box and come up and defending the run. You're like, geez, should we be doing that? But it works out for him all right. Mackenzie Alexander they brought in to play the slot. He was injured last week as well, so we'll see if he's back. But he's looked pretty good this year, both in coverage and in run support. With him out, Darius Phillips moved from outside corner into the slot last week. Real speedy dude. I'm not sure if he played against the Ravens last year or not. He was injured the first part of the year. But played 8 games last year and had 4 picks. Like, guy
Wow.
makes plays. Guy, figures out how to get around the ball. He's the guy that a lot of people would like to see as the punt returner taking Alex Erickson's role. But really a playmaker back there, but just seems to be a step short a lot this year. And I don't know if that is that he's a little banged up or what it is, but he just seems like he's just a step behind where you want him to be. LaShawn Sims played a little bit on the outside last week, as Phillips had to move inside, and he was a little bit behind as well. I just felt like he was a little bit slow to respond. So hopefully they're back at full capacity next week. Jesse Bates we talked about in the intro, so I won't get too deep into him, but here's a guy, they got him in the second round a couple years ago in the draft, and to me, he was one of the best deep field. He's probably the best deep field safety in that draft. But I feel like a lot of times when we're evaluating prospects, for some reason, even though it's a passing league, we get really, really excited about box safeties.
Oh, I want the center fielder. That's the guy you generally have to spend a first round pick on, and Bates is a marvelous value in round 2.
Yeah,
number 54
absolutely.
Overall.
Yeah, real ball hawk back there. Had some problems tackling around the year, but hopefully it's we're not relying on him to make a lot of tackles back there. Von Bell is the starter at strong safety. He is kind of the opposite. He's a better box guy. Real tough guy, good tackler. Can come inside the box or just rock down on the edge. Sean Williams is a little bit of an in between guy. Bengals fans were a little bit down on this guy last year, but honestly, I felt like they were playing him too much in the box, and he was kind of almost playing a linebacker type of role last year. So I think he'll be better off in a reserve role where they can bring him in situations where they want him to play in the deep field. Actually, I could give you an example of how they feel about Bell.
Is he a back end half field dime, or would you? I mean, I see 6'0", 212, and I'm thinking if he's fast, obviously too, but wouldn't he be pretty good as a pure dime back on third downs as opposed to say a linebacker?
Yeah, so I think he can play. I just don't want to see him in the box, and they were getting him actually in the box like a linebacker too much, and I forget what the numbers on it were, but like PFF was actually considering him a linebacker a lot of the time last year. So I think he can rock down and be outside, and I think he can play the deep field. I think he's pretty good at the deep field as well. And to give you an example of how they feel about Bell, if you've broken down the Eagles game and you saw the touchdown they gave up to the Eagles right before the half, they were playing cover 2, but it was a version of cover 2 where Von Bell was rocked down, and he was really like the Tampa Mike Backer, running the deep middle. Mackenzie Alexander was the slot lined up over the slot, and he turned and ran, and he was the cover 2 safety essentially. So he's playing a deep field from there. So I think that was their way of using their personnel and saying, hey, we feel more comfortable with Alexander in a deep half than we do with Von Bell. So I'm hoping with Williams back, they won't have to get that crazy, that exotic with things. And if they want to be in a cover 2, that they can, put Williams on the field.
Okay, well, I definitely think Bates is the rare commodity, obviously, and I'm sure you wouldn't dispute that in any way, but he's certainly the best safety. But just in general, you see teams pick up 10 safeties sometimes, and in camp or anyway, they might have 8. And of those guys, you've only got one guy who's really a good center field candidate among all of them. And it should tell people, teams need to focus on getting a center fielder with that top pick. But it's just, I agree with you. I think people overvalue what players bring in the box in terms of their run fits and how, we'll be able to stop the run with a nickel, and as if that's really the centerpiece to playing great defense in the NFL these days.
Yeah, and I don't know how many, like you said, it's a rare commodity. I don't know how many really good center field players there are out there. I think there's a lot of value to back in the day what the 49ers did, and more recently what the Patriots did with Ronnie Lott and Devin McCourty. Take a corner, and if you've got a corner who's really smart and can do some things, move him back there. Devin McCourty had a very good rookie year at corner and a not so good second year at corner, but I still believe that Devin McCourty could be a very solid corner in this league. But they were smart enough to realize that he could be an elite safety. So, I think sometimes you got to be creative with what you're getting out of college.
Yeah, That's a good point. Uh, okay, let's talk specifically about this game in terms of defending Jackson, Brown, and Andrews. Obviously, Jackson kind of had his way with the Bengals in the second game last year. I think Andrews did as well. How did the Bengals handle that kind of speed?
Well, that was interesting last year. Due to due to the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands, so I went through and I broke down all the Bengals games last year's offense and defense, and I actually broke down the Ravens offense as well. Made a couple videos out of that, but it was interesting that the first matchup with the Ravens was the majority of the time that the Bengals ran 4-3 defense all year. That personnel group. So I think they came out in that first game and they thought, well, we don't want to have a nickel on the field, but we don't want to have the extra defensive lineman. They thought they were smart putting that extra linebacker, and that was problematic. We'll just say that. And the second game they were doing a little bit more of what they do in terms of running some nickel and quite a bit of that 5-down look, that 3-4 look. So that's what I would expect. That's how they try and stop the run. Is with that 3-4 bare front look. I think they'll definitely see a lot of that. They have run a lot of cover one. I really hope they're smart enough to not run cover one against Lamar Jackson, because I want all eyes on that guy when they're in coverage, because they've let quarterbacks get away from them, and that's the other thing that hurt them against the Eagles was. On the last drive of regulation, they let Wentz escape the pocket and run and pick up a couple of first downs with his legs. And as we all know, Carson Wentz may be able to pick up first downs with his legs, but you're going for a 50-yard touchdown if you're giving that much room to Lamar Jackson. So hopefully it's a little bit more zone. I'm interested to see if they try the dime stuff. As we talk about the skill set of Von Bell and Sean Williams, if they try and use those as their de facto outside linebackers to have a little bit more speed in the field. But it's definitely going to be a huge challenge stopping that run game because this team has had a lot of just mental breakdowns, just one guy out of position, one guy out of the hole. And as you know, you run an option offense, that's trouble,
That's what you look for
when you're having those types of breakdowns.
All right, well, that's some great stuff. Is there a player that you think really matches up well against the Ravens?
Yeah.
Offense or defense?
I think Boyd could be an interesting one because, as you pointed out, a lot of his, he's very good in that middle range and he's very good over the middle. So, in particular, if they can run the ball and hold those linebackers a little bit, I think
Oh,
Boyd, with a young Queen in there, could have some opportunities to be able to get open and find some seams there. And I think that's a good place for Burrow to be able to go with the football too.
Boy, if you want to be optimistic about the Bengals' chance, read my defensive article from this last week and see what Patrick Queen did. Because the guy is completely lost in coverage, completely lost. Had a great game, 12 tackles, 7 defensive wins among those tackles that he contributed to, 3 tackles for loss, which is, it's a remarkably high total for an inside linebacker. But he had 5 breakdowns on the field where there's a demonstrable action by another defender to either reposition him or scold him after the play. And all in coverage. Unbelievable. I've never seen it before. So anyway, take a look at that if you want to be entertaining yourself before the game.
Definitely.
Matt, we loved having you on here. This is a great discussion. Tell us a little bit about where people can find your work and Twitter, anything else you'd like to plug.
Yeah, so basically all my stuff gets to Twitter at some point. So it's at Coach Minich, CoachMinich. And probably the best place to find me, I write for Cincy Jungle, but our YouTube page is called Orange and Black Insider. And that's where I do a lot of video breakdowns, mostly Bengals stuff. Like I said, I broke down all the Ravens games over the course of the spring when I couldn't go to work. So I've actually got 3 Ravens videos out there too, breaking down their offensive running game, their use of formations and motions. And then I did a 12-minute video that specifically focused on 2 and 3-man backfields and the things they did out of those. So,
will you send me links of that? I will post the links on my Twitter and make sure that Ravens fans get a hold of them because I'm sure they'd love to see your analysis of that.
yeah, absolutely. So, that's good. I was just gonna say you had to dig a little bit to find all that old stuff, but yeah, you definitely might enjoy that stuff. So, yeah, that's probably the best place to find me.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for being on here. Josh, anything we need to plug or talk about?
No, we got to buy the numbers coming out tomorrow, as well as all the articles and previous podcasts from this week are all on filmstudybaltimore.com.
It's true. Offensive
So
line article just went up today with the scoring from week 4. If you want to look at how those newly allocated tackles worked out this last week.
All right. And then always rate, review the show. That helps us out a lot. Share it as well. So, all right. We will talk next week, or I guess Friday. By the numbers.